So now Booker comes to the gates of the city where he must be baptized so that he is transformed and, of course, reborn, because the whole idea of a baptism is that you're birthed into, you're purified, because when you're born, you are born pure, right? But when you're born, when you're baptized, you're born spiritually. So it's a different type of birth than a physical birth. So just as we are all first born from the water of the womb, so in the same way, a baptism is the ceremony by which one may be reborn, metaphysically or spiritually. Emerging from the water yet again, being cleansed in a spiritual sense and born into a new world and presumably a new level of awareness, as it were. Baptisms represent a new birth, hence the religious order of, let's say, for example, the born-again Christian, right? That's what that idea is all about. So it doesn't matter what your sins were beforehand or what kind of person you were. If you're born again and you come into this world born again, you are purified again, you're brand new, you get to start over. Only when one is spiritually birthed and thereby purified will the initiate be allowed to pass through the gates and into a greater level of understanding. So this is what this whole ceremony is about here in Bioshock Infinite. Here we can clearly see that the angels guarding the gates are holding the key, which is, of course, a symbol of passage and transformation. And of course, the priest makes a comment about Booker not meeting up to this ideal, but he decides to let him in anyway. Clearly, another bit of foreshadowing that there is something about Booker that has yet to be revealed, much less atoned for. Before Booker crosses this threshold into Columbia, however, while he's being baptized, he revisits a very sorrowful yet pivotal moment in the story. His most regretful moment of his past flashes before his eyes, as if this isn't some routine baptism at all, but it's something else. And this is yet another clue for what is in store for Booker DeWitt, of course. Now, in the next cutscene, or in the next scene here, and oh yeah, I didn't even notice there's a little hummingbird down there under Father Jefferson. DeWitt comes to, and he's greeted by the presence of these 3 statues in the garden, which are the founding fathers of the United States of America. So obviously we know that there's this play of the 3 virtues, the Trinity, and 3 founding fathers. So we see this interchangeably throughout the entire game. It's absolutely everywhere. Now, each founding father is represented as, or represents an embodiment of the 3 Columbian governmental pillars, and these governmental pillars are tied to the tripartite of virtues of the sword, the key, and the scroll. So there's this overlap and this convergence of this kind of this civic model meets this holy religious model. And of course, this is a religious city-state when we're talking about Columbia. So it makes sense that you'd have this convergence of all of these, the civic, secular elements running the city and the government and that kind of thing, with the so the practical, the physical, the civic, the secular, combining, of course, with the metaphysical, the religious. So we can see here Ben Franklin holds the key as the embodiment of knowledge as well as science. Thomas Jefferson is holding the scroll as the embodiment of the statesman and the law, and George Washington holds the sword as the embodiment of the warrior and the general. And of course, for reasons we shall examine later, Comstock appears to position himself as sort of the single embodiment of these three men and the virtues they represent. So it's almost as if, and I'll explain a little bit later why Comstock sees himself as kind of the outcropping of these three founding fathers. He sees them as sort of the foundation, creating the foundation for his ideal utopian city-state. Here at the entrance to Columbia still, we are shown that Father Washington is being venerated religiously, right? So there's, again, this convergence of the civic or secular government and religion. And the emphasis here is being placed on the virtue of the sword, which tells us quite a lot. We know that since the sword is in the middle and we have the key and the scroll kind of at the periphery, then we're being told right there that the sword is the highest virtue or the most important virtue. It's at the top of the spiral staircase. It's most prominently placed over the other two virtues. So each of these figures represents the three civic duties or ideals which every citizen of Columbia is expected to uphold. This scene also hints at the lack of division or, of course, a blending of church and state or of spirituality and government. This idea of God's law and political order being in the same, it's a very old idea, God's law and political order being one and the same. And we've only come into the notion of any separation in in human history fairly recently after the post-Enlightenment revolutions. So unlike the three virtues of rapture that we see below, which are art, science, and industry, which are rather secular and non-religious in nature, even when we account for the Promethean mythic ideals hiding in plain sight with the first Bioshock game, the tripartite of virtues in Columbia, on the other hand, most certainly take on a more religious flavor. I don't know what flavor I don't know what religion tastes like, but if it had a flavor, get back to me on that one. I will point out a little later why this tripartite of virtues in Columbia has a dirty little secret, which is concealing a hidden meaning that serves a dark purpose. The history of governments are littered with public-facing messages which conceal a dark undercurrent of reality. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we move through this presentation. Here in the garden is a reference to Noah's Ark as those whom are righteous and worthy of God's divine light being the inhabitants of Columbia. Lucky you. The terrestrial world below mainly is reserved for the non-believers and the wicked. And you can almost say that the terrestrial world below is analogous to hell in a lot of the Colombian residents' minds, and they are elevated into heaven. Only this time, instead of, this idea of drowning the earth with water because of all of the wickedness, the prophecy of Columbia, the prophecy of Zachary Comstock, mentions drowning the earth in flame. And in classic Bioshock fashion, the player is shown much of the story using the visual elements rather than told in an obvious narration style, right? You've got these banners everywhere, just like the first Bioshock. We've got these, there's these red banners everywhere, and it's all of Andrew Ryan's rhetoric. And now here we have Comstock's rhetoric and his propaganda, and it's absolutely everywhere.